A little while back I made a review of the SJCam SJ8 and I really liked it. It was a really solid camera for a pretty good price, and I've since then loaned that to a friend and he's also been very happy with it for quite a while now. So today we're going to take a first look, a kind of first impressions type discussion of the SJCam SJ10. We're going to talk about how I feel about this camera overall, what it has up over the SJCam 8, and just some, of my first impressions through the first tests and stuff. This is a prototype, so it may not be completely finalized, but I think I've got a good feel for it after using this for a few weeks now. So let's get into it. Hey, I'm Scott and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, thank you for watching, and please do consider subscribing. We do all kinds of unboxings, tests, reviews, tutorials, anything photo and video related. So if you like the content today, again, please do consider subscribing. Make sure to hit the little bell icon to get notifications when new content is uploaded. So like I said, today we're just going to take a first look at the SJCam SJ10. I believe this is the SJ10 Pro Action, so they'll probably have, again, a couple of different models in their lineup just like they have in the past. So we're going to talk about this one specifically and what's built into here now. And again, this is a prototype, so all of this may not be finalized. Some of it may be improved, some of it may be tweaked a little bit, but for the most part, just from using it, this does feel like a pretty finalized camera. So I'm going to talk about it as much as I can today in the scope of what I have been using it for. Now, the first thing that I've noticed with this camera and also with past SJCam cameras that I've used is when you pick it up, you can feel the quality. I mean, if you hold this side by side with something like a GoPro or even the Insta360, you can feel that these are on the same level build quality wise. You feel like you can trust it. Everything just feels polished and smooth. Things like the battery doors close securely. They don't feel like they're going to break off. It's just a very good feeling camera. When you compare it with something like these, which are much more budget friendly, these are maybe about $60 and $100 give or take, you can really feel the difference, and it's definitely going to inspire me to use the SJCam more confidently than I would with these. These, if they break at any time, I'm really not quite surprised. So that is definitely something I think that should be present in an action camera that usually sees quite a lot of abuse. Another thing that has to be mentioned for the SJCam is that this is waterproof out of the box. I'll put these specs on screen. I believe it was up to 3 meters, but it's waterproof out of the box, just like the newer GoPros, just like the Insta360, which is really fantastic because it doesn't mean you have to go swimming with it, but if you're out in the rain or if it gets splashed, if you're at the beach or somewhere, it's definitely nice to know that this can take it without having to be in an extra housing that affects sound quality, that just makes it a little bit more troublesome to use the touchscreen. There's a lot of negatives that go along with having to use a housing, and with this you don't have to, which is great. Also, since it is waterproof out of the box, they do give you a little screw thread on the bottom of here built into the body itself, so you can mount this without having to use even that kind of frame type of housing, which they do provide for a little bit more maybe ease of attaching things. But you do have a screw thread on the bottom of here, so you can get going with it right out of the box, which again is very useful if you don't want to use anything extra on there. Now, if you look at the lens on here, it's a very wide angle lens first off, which is great because if you activate things like EIS or distortion correction, it's going to crop in on that a bit. So having that wide angle lens to start with is great, and this is a very nice wide angle lens. But also, if you look at it physically speaking, it looks like there's kind of a cover on here that should be able to be removed or replaced if it cracks, if it breaks, which is really great. It's a great way to continue using the camera even if something happens without having to replace the entire body, and that should be user replaceable. I've tried to kind of twist it off myself. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to put too much effort into it just in case I'm wrong there. I will talk to SJCam just to confirm or deny that, and then I'll put the information up on screen. It's just been a little bit tricky to go back and forth with them while they're on vacation right now, but I will find that out before I make this video and post it up. In terms of the microphones or audio on here, it's obviously an action camera, so you can't expect miracles, but I feel like it's been doing pretty good. I'm going to put a couple of quick tests in here just to test against things like wind noise and to test against handling noise if you're holding it in your hand like this. But generally speaking, I found that it's done pretty well. It hasn't overly disappointed me. It hasn't really stuck out in any ways negatively. This is just to test the audio in the camera, just to see how it sounds. There's not really any wind today, but I'm talking to it from about an arm's length away. But as I turn it around in my hand, I'm just grabbing the camera in different ways. We'll see how the noise is there. See if there's a lot of handling noise. I'm sure there is, but we'll see as my fingers come across some places where the microphones may be. One thing that's been a little bit frustrating with this, and it's not unique solely to this camera, is that the SD card is a little bit tricky to get in and out, just because, you know, it's inside of this door and it's a little deep and it's kind of close to the edge, so you really got to use your fingernail to kind of pop it in and pop it out. Something with an open design like this camera here is going to be a little bit easier, but then, you know, that's not waterproof, obviously, so you do need that cover here. And just as a side note, I found that the Insta360 card is much more difficult to get out than this one is, so it's definitely not unique to this. Just be aware that you're going to have to put a little bit of effort into popping that in and popping it out. Now when it comes to controlling or navigating the menus in this thing, you only have one physical button on the top, and that is the power on, power off, record, or stop button. Everything else is going to be controlled by the touchscreen on the back, and it is a nice large touchscreen, a very good image. If you're looking at the image on the back of the screen, the colors and everything seem really nice. And it's pretty responsive, so controlling it via the touchscreen is a pretty intuitive and pleasant experience. There have been a couple times where it's a little bit frustrating because in the menu, when you try to choose options like the frame rates, you have to scroll through there, and sometimes you can accidentally select something instead of just scrolling, and you have to go back into there and scroll and select it again, and it's kind of a back and forth dance at times where you're trying to scroll, select it, go back in, scroll again, no, select it again. There's no confirmation button. When you touch an option in the menu in that scroll list, it's going to select it and back out of that menu. So if you accidentally do that, you do have to dive back in again. So it's kind of a give and take there. Of course, it's faster to select things without having to push two buttons to select it and then confirm it. But it does leave you open for those accidental selects sometimes if your fingers are a little bit maybe drier or stickier, or you're having trouble with the touchscreen. But generally speaking, in terms of touchscreens across the board, this has been as good as any other touchscreen that I've used on a camera like this. The menu system hasn't changed a whole lot since the SJCam 8, or at all as far as I can tell, and that's a good thing. I did like the way that the menu system worked. It's pretty easy to navigate, pretty easy to find stuff quickly and make adjustments quickly. They do have some like Q&A things in the menu that you can select to give you more information on the options that you're looking at. So if you're not sure exactly what the details of that thing is, if you don't know what frame rates certain things are compatible with, like the electronic image stabilization, it will tell you that right on screen. So there's a good amount of kind of guide information, helpful information built into the menu, which I really do appreciate. In terms of modes and features, you of course are getting a little bit more than the SJCam 8 here. You're getting up to 4K 60 frames per second, which is pretty good. You get 120 frames per second in 1080 full HD. And of course, things like the electronic image stabilization are not compatible with those highest options, but of course if you step it back even just one step, then again you can use those different options in there. And the image quality here is fantastic. It seems clean, there's not a lot of noise there. The dynamic range looks very good, the colors look very good. Of course you can tweak things a little bit if you want, but I've been very happy with the image out of the box here. And even in 1080, when you go down to 1080, even pushing it up to 120 frames per second, it looks great, and I honestly wouldn't hesitate to mix that in with 4K footage. It's not going to jump out at you as being lower resolution. It looks really great, both in 4K and in 1080p and at higher frames per second. So really satisfied with the very good image quality on this camera. Again, I'm not going to scientifically test it, but just in terms of as a user, I've been really happy with this. And again, I've been using it side by side with something like the Insta360. Been very satisfied with this, sometimes even more so than the Insta360. In terms of usability and functions and things that are built into here, honestly, I wish I had more to say, but I don't, just because everything's been just as I would hope it would be. I haven't had any bugs, I haven't had any crashes or freezes whatsoever, and I've been pushing this to the max. Everything is there. It's got 24 frames per second, so you don't have to worry about being locked out of that. Some cameras only have 30. Time-lapse and other modes have a good amount of customizability. You got raw photos built into here. It just worked really, really well. I haven't had any issues with longer recordings. I've used it for time-lapses and standard recording, both for over an hour and a half, and I had no issues whatsoever, even in 4K, no overheating. I used it in very cold temperatures, no issues whatsoever. Obviously, I've used it when it gets wet, no issues whatsoever. Battery life in those cold conditions, I was recording in an ice rink, are also pretty good. It lasted for about an hour and a half, or just over an hour and a half. And when I went back to check it, it had the low battery warning on screen. It didn't shut down yet, but I stopped the recording because we were leaving, and it did have that low battery warning. So I'm assuming that pretty soon after that it would have shut off. But that was about an hour and a half, or over an hour and a half, in pretty cold conditions, recording 4K 24 frames per second continuously the entire time. The one thing that I did find, and I did mention this to SJCam, and they're going to be looking into it a little bit, is just when the card is full and I went to format it, I wasn't able to. It just gave me a card full, I guess you could call it error message, and it wouldn't allow me to format it. But when I went into the playback menu and I deleted at least one video just to free up a little bit of space on the card, and then I went back into the format, it worked again. So if you're having issues with formatting a full card, just go ahead and delete something and then go back and you can format it, no problem. One last thing, of course, that's worth mentioning with this is that there is a mobile app that you can use to monitor and control this. And it's a really good app. There's obviously a little bit of lag at times. It depends on how solid your connection is. I found it to be very responsive sometimes. I found it to be a little bit too laggy at other times. But generally speaking, it works pretty good, and the amount of control that you can have from that app is really, really great. It's almost better than actually on the camera itself, the things that you can just dive in and choose resolutions, frame rates. You can tweak pretty much anything in the menu right from the mobile app, and it's very, very easy. It's all laid out there on screen. Stabilization is also something I haven't mentioned yet, so we're just going to go ahead and put some tests here with and without stabilization, just to see kind of how smooth it can do when I'm not really being careful, just walking with it like you typically would with an action camera. You're not going to be overly careful with it, and we'll see how smooth it is, how effective it is, and how natural it looks. But otherwise, that's, I think, pretty much all that I've really encountered in my use of this. Again, if there's something I haven't mentioned, it's because it hasn't stood out in a negative way. Everything that's built into here, if you check the specs when those are available, just has worked flawlessly. It's been bug free, it's been crash free, freeze free. It's solidly built, it's really well made, and just I could not recommend this higher. I assume it's going to be cheaper than the GoPro. I'm not sure of the exact pricing yet. I will let you know when I have that information, but I know it's going to be cheaper than the GoPro, and I think it's going to be a great value. It is a step up from some of those cheaper budget cams, and you're definitely going to feel it. You're going to experience that difference right away. The first day that you use it, you'll know why this costs a little bit more than some of the cheaper options on the market. But for now, if you have any more questions or anything that you want to see tested in a bit more depth, then let me know down in the comments below, and I will do my best to get back to you, and I will do my best to try and test those things and create some content regarding that. But otherwise, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more in the future, and as always, thank you for watching.